willingness to open your heart and mind. Is there someone on your journey, someone, family, friend, neighbor, church member, yourself and your chosen family? Who is that person? Picture them in your mind's eye. We won't name those folks aloud, just because we don't all know all of the people in our lives, and we want to honor that sacred trust. But if you have someone that you are picturing in your mind's eye, I hope you keep them in your mind, because they have been formative on your journey. And by God's grace, if we were to ask this same question in another setting, in another venue, perhaps someday someone might be picked as three.
Before we move to there,
Yes.
Can I say something
Yes,
about
please.
the theology of belonging? This is something, the theology of welcome has in our congregation taken on new language recently around belonging. And let me say a word about that, and also acknowledge that the work that we're engaging in is lifelong work. It is an evolution that is continuing forever. And so I don't say these words thinking that we have arrived, but rather just to continue to deepen what we're experiencing. So in our congregation, here's how we think about the theology of belonging. God is living and active in queer people. God has always been the God of queer people. Queer identities have always been a reflection of the goodness of God. So when we come at this work from a place of welcome, we can sometimes fall into the trap of assuming that the non-queer people are the ones doing the welcoming to the queer people. And there's a hierarchy there that can form, where I am in and you are not, and so I am going to welcome you in or choose whether or not to include you, right? In the kingdom of God, the theology is flipped. God is at work in the margins always. And those folks that maybe we have not included or extended that act of hospitality are actually where Christ is closest. And so for us, it's evolved from a position of me welcoming you to me recognizing that the kingdom of God is at work in the queer community already, and we're the ones missing out. We're the ones not showing up to the table. And so when we think about making space at the table, it's not let me, a non-queer person, scoot over to finally give you space. Queer people have always been at God's table, right? And so we have to turn that theology upside down.
That's beautiful. Okay. And so that theology of welcome, you hear where that authentic welcome has become true belonging, because the expectation is not come along for the ride that we're already on. It is opening up the privilege of, can we be on the journey that you're already on?
Right.
And that is a completely different way of looking, that upside down kingdom of welcome and of belonging. That's beautiful. And we're going to be hearing that in some of the practical steps of the whys of the practical steps, the why of what we do. And so we're going to be returning to that in just a bit. So we're going to be talking in three main categories: hospitality, visibility, and publicity. And living into true belonging in a variety of ways. We're going to start with hospitality, and we're just going to jump in and have kind of a laundry list sort of discussion and conversation around these topics, because I suspect that many of us who have driven near and far to gather in this space are hoping to leave with some tangibles, maybe some bullet points of first steps, next steps, or what's next. And so when we think of hospitality in the place of the Church of Jesus Christ, one of the places where we gather most frequently, most fully, is in a space just like this one, in the context of worship. And so we think of language that we use in worship. In the past 30 to 40 years, the language of our denominational resources finally switched from brothers, you are forgiven, to brothers and sisters, you are forgiven, right? We got the sister language in there in the past 30 to 40 years, thanks be to God. There are folks in our midst who are non-binary, who are transgender, who are gender expansive, for whom brothers and sisters does not ring true to their experience. And so having a variety of language in worship, brothers, sisters, and siblings in Christ, for example, is not exclusive of the brothers in the room, not exclusive of the sisters in the room. It adds an additional element that allows others to be fully seen. In a similar way, the language we use around father is complicated in a whole lot of ways. And in the context of LGBTQIA+ inclusion, the recognition that not every queer person has great relationships with their biological father, and recognizing that that is an outsized impact, if you will, on many queer folks and their experience of family life. There are so many other ways that we can address language in the act of worship. Our denominational resources are doing some great work on that, both in our hymn books, where there are either changed lyrics or lyrics down in the margins where you can think of expansive language, in our prayers, in our call to worship journal, and other places. There was a recent, it's my job to do a few shout outs, and so there was a recent call to worship journal article written by Brian Ellison about queer inclusion in the life of worship. And if that is of interest to you, talk to him because he'll know where to find it. And that is a great resource as well. Another example of language is in the way we use pronouns. For our congregation, we started with pronouns in email subject lines, with a link that you see he, him next to my name, and you click on it, and it offers a blog post that I wrote about the use of pronouns. And so we started there. And then an invitation for others to add pronouns to their church name tags as a form of hospitality. What we did not do, although it is true that each and every person has pronouns, and if we ban pronouns, that's going to make language really hard. We have not said you must have pronouns on your church name tag. What we have said, instead of the you must do this, is an invitation for hospitality. A way to be hospitable to all of the siblings in Christ in our community might be to add your pronouns to your name tag, so that those in your midst know how best to refer to you, and you are better able to refer to them. That language of invitation versus requirement can go a long way. And then, in terms of restrooms and other spaces, when we think of hospitality, there's a reason that when you go to a Presbyterian meeting or you go to an event like this, one of the very first things that happen, Jenny showed it beautifully at the start of today. She welcomed us to the building and then immediately made the age-old joke, you really just want to know where the bathrooms are, right? There's a reason that it always starts with that, because bodies matter. We are in bodies, we are embodied, and we have bodily needs. And so to start to have those conversations of all gender bathrooms, or bathrooms that are available for those who need certain accommodations and needs. Churches that I'm familiar with including the one I serve in Boise, have done it exactly like Shandon has done it, where there are some multi-stall bathrooms in one place and some all-gender bathrooms in various other places, and it provides hospitality for all. Are there things that Fourth has done in that world of hospitality?
Well, I think for us, when we were having the conversation about bathrooms, what we first had to do was say, who are the folks in our congregation who might benefit from having a single stall bathroom? And let's have them walk us through the church. Let's say they're visiting for the first time. One of the first things you need to know when you visit somewhere is, where do I go to the bathroom? It's the first thing I want to know. And so we said, pretend this is your first time, and on each floor or wing of the church, you're looking for a bathroom. How would you find it? So that pointed us not just to the presence of where our bathrooms are located, but to our signage. How do you know where to go? Literally.
Excellent.
And for us, it started down in our youth wing, but that's because that's where we have the most LGBTQ plus people out youth. And they're the ones who were initially going, can I just use that bathroom? Because there's always a line for the women's bathrooms, and the men's bathrooms are always empty, but it was single stall. And then it was like, why don't we just make them both all gender? So it sort of started as a matter of practicality, and then it expanded into hospitality from that, where we said, okay, now let's say you're upstairs in the sanctuary, then what do you do? Sometimes we who are not queer are blind in our own spaces. You just forget, because you know where everything's at in your church, and you know how to navigate your resources. But you have to have somebody who's new or somebody who's not like you to say, hey, let's figure this out. And they can see things that we can no longer see,
One of the great things about any modifications we make, whether in our language or in our facilities or even in our practices and our programming and our ministries, is that it impacts a variety of folks in a variety of different ways. And so in the example of all-gender bathrooms, while we are here speaking directly to the context of queer identities, there are folks with physical needs that require extra space that the average church bathroom with multiple stalls built in 1950 cannot offer. And so the act of replacing multiple stalls with a single stall is actually beneficial for a variety of reasons, a variety of purposes, and that hospitality then extends beyond queer identity to folks with physical disabilities. And that is true of so many practices. When you start thinking about hospitality for one, it ends up being hospitality for all, which is a really beautiful thing and can help others on the journey as well. It occurs to me, Jackie, that what you said, you started by having folks walk through the space with fresh eyes, and that is education. Like you were doing the work of educating, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you started with a place of educating yourselves of how best to be welcoming and hospitable for a true belonging. What has that looked like for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's listening to the people who are most directly impacted by a lack of equity and representation and belonging. We always say that the people who are closest to the problems are always closest to the solutions. So if you have a bunch of people like me, a cisgender straight white woman, trying to make decisions on behalf of marginalized communities, I'm going to have blind spots. And so we need to be listening to people who don't have the same blind spots, because they're going to have better solutions. Now, if your congregations look anything like my congregations, we are overwhelmingly white, we are overwhelmingly wealthy, and overwhelmingly educated, right? So we don't have a lot of diversity in our congregation. So what that meant for us too was looking outside of our walls and going, who are the experts and how can we learn from them? Who are the people who are offering their services to the community for education? And that's how we partnered with the Queer Wellness Center. So Cynthia Gordon, who's here today, you saw them on the panel, works at the Queer Wellness Center along with many others. And over the course of about a 2.5-year span, they came in and taught over 20 classes in our congregation. And you may say, 20? That's crazy. That's how many it's taken, okay? We have 100+ years of history where we have not been doing this education. And so yes, it has taken 20+, and it will probably take 200 more over the next 100 years of the life of the church. And we brought them in as experts and said, and every time they came, they brought a panel of like 4 people with them. So they recognized that even within the queer community, there's a variety of perspectives, and they gave us the opportunity to hear from so many of them. And so you may look around in your church and go, everyone in my church looks like me. Well, who in your larger community could you bring in to help you navigate these conversations? And for us, that partnership with the Queer Wellness Center was essential. They taught us things that we could never have taught ourselves. And I also want to say that the Queer Wellness Center offers their services to the community because they're passionate about it, and that's their professional work. What we did not do is go to a few token queer people in our congregation and say, will you do this? Will you teach us everything? There are some folks who want to engage in this work and to support the community in this, and there are others who don't, and for a variety of very valid reasons. And so it's important not to expect queer people to do the labor for you. But if you find yourself in need of resources, first of all, I brought a resource sheet today that I'll hand out with some stuff that was helpful for us. But, you know, work with the people who are offering this to the community, not with the people you think should be offering this to the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for some queer folks entering into the life of the church, them walking through the door is the burden that they have had. Mm-hmm. And any further burden might just be the burden that sends them back out that door. Yeah. And so don't make the assumption. Some are ready to help, and mm-hmm. others are just hoping for a place of hope and respite and mm-hmm. peace. And so being mindful of that.
And when you are relying on the expertise and wisdom of someone else, please compensate them fairly mm-hmm. for that work. We in the church are really bad about asking people to volunteer out of the goodness of their heart, and we run on a lot of volunteerism, but when you're asking a queer person to do this type of labor on your behalf, there has to be compensation and appreciation and us putting value on that work in the form of fair compensation. And I will say that our congregation has paid more than the Queer Wellness Center has asked every single time because we recognize the value in it.
I think this is, it's such a privilege when I am a part of this particular workshop at events like this to hear from folks who are on the ground in the local communities. And so the fact that you are getting to hear what Fourth Presbyterian of Greenville, South Carolina has been doing is such a gift to y'all, but also to me. To hear, there's been 2+ years of education. You know, we didn't just slap an all-gender restroom sign on the door and hope that people would understand, but it requires a financial investment. It requires mm-hmm. an educational investment. It requires recognizing that we are not the knowers of all knowledge, mm-hmm. And a certain humility that comes with that as well.
And risk.
Mm-hmm.
And risk in this. I feel like what I can clearly say is that the congregation that we have today is much smaller than it was 5 years ago. And you know, we could say, well, nationally, churches are down 37% post-COVID. That's the Pew Research Center. Of course, it is our LGBTQ+ belonging work and our anti-racism work that has contributed to some of that decline. And yet, is that our only measure of congregational vitality? The church that I am seeing today, we had a really hard year about a year and a half ago. The leadership, we were in the trenches going, oh my, what is going to happen to us? And now the energy and the new life and the hope and the creativity and the brilliant gifts that we are receiving from LGBTQ+ people who are in our congregation with more visibility, and their full authentic selves, you can't measure that. And it is the most alive place that I've ever had the privilege of serving. So I do say that as a word of caution, but also encouragement that, you do this work and your congregation will change. It will look very different. And yet, I feel as though the alignment with the Spirit of God at work among us, you can't measure it. It can't be measured in people, numbers in your pews.
Yeah. Well, and that leads sort of into a segue of the next kind of theme, which is the theme of visibility. It is one thing to say, oh yes, all are welcome here. Please come in the doors and be just like us. And that's what we mean by welcome. You're going to want to talk like us, to think like us, to act like us, and do the programs that we've been doing for 45 years. If anything, we would like some new volunteers to take over those 40-year-old activities because they're tired of it and they're burnt out. So welcome. So glad you're here. That's one form of welcome. Another form of welcome is visible acts of true belonging. And as we are going about that work of authentic welcome, the church may not look the same that it did 10 years ago. And in fact, it hopefully won't. And so how do we play that out in terms of visible signifiers beyond the cliched all are welcome banner in front of a church congregation? I can tell you, as someone who searched for a new call in the past 3 or 4 years, that every single profile for a church listing an open position had the words, "We are a welcoming congregation." Every single one, 100% track record. In fact, I kept track of it. Every single one said, "We are a welcoming congregation." That is not true. We're on live stream right now, so I toned that one way down. And so what does it look like to be visibly welcoming, to show that true belonging? For one thing, I want to note full participation in leadership. We heard Ken in the opening plenary talk about how he and his family were warmly welcomed into the congregation and then immediately told, "You can't be at the table, though. We're glad you're here." What does it look like for queer folks to be at every part of leadership in the church? Pastoral leadership, staff leadership, elders and deacons, and then to name that aloud. In a place like, I served in Greenville, South Carolina in prior life, and so I can tell you that in the congregation I served in Greenville, we had some new folks who came to our congregation because the pictures of our elders were on the church webpage, and they saw women. And they knew, oh, it's the Presbyterian church that ordains women. And we had folks come through our doors. That simple, like we didn't say on the homepage, we're the Presbyterian Church USA, we ordain women to all ordained bodies. We have pictures of our elders, and some of them were not men. And it allowed families who were looking for a place where all could be at the table to know that they could belong there. That same thing rings true of any other marker, be it of race, be it of ethnicity, be it of gender identity and expression. And one of the ways that the majority of the staff at Southminster in Boise are queer identifying, and not all are visibly queer identifying, whatever that means. We do all have pronouns under our photos and names. And so even on the staff page and the website, it is very clear this is a part of who we are. To see, imagine the Advent readers. Many churches have a long and storied tradition of inviting the perfect picture-perfect family to light the Advent wreath, and it's either to make the grandparents cry or in recent years to try to get families in the door. Let's be honest. If we sign them up for something, it means they're there that Sunday. I know what it is. What does it look like to have a queer family? To have a transgender person reading those words of hopefulness in the midst of the darkest days of Advent. So really thinking through that leadership. I want to say a note of participation in community events. There are plenty of congregations that have a presence in Pride events or Pride festivals, Pride parades. They're often in the month of June. I would encourage congregations to not be like corporate America that changes their logos into. This is a place that to get to the how, you have to know your why. There was that famous TED Talk several years ago of know your why, and you have to pick the why first, and then you figure out the what and the when and the how. And we so often start with the what and get to the why last. We have to check our assumptions here. Why do we want to be a place of authentic belonging? Is it because we want more members in the pews? Is it because we want to be visible? To remind the community that that little church in the corner is there? Is it to build authentic relationship? All of that impacts the strategy of what we do when we are out in the community. When you show up at a place like a Pride event, if what you are looking for is members in the pews, your strategy is going to look different than if what you're looking for is a place of building relationships and offering trust, even offering apology for the ways the institutional church has harmed queer people throughout the generations. I would go so far as to say the work of trying to get folks in to sit in the pews, if that's your strategy, it's probably not going to work. So what are the other possibilities? And checking those assumptions and being honest about them. I think sometimes we do this work of, well, it's kind of a buzzword right now to be welcoming and inclusive. We see Target with the rainbow Target symbol in the month of June. Maybe some of the young people will come. We need to name that aloud. And if that is our expectation, maybe do a little bit more reflection, maybe a couple more years of education alongside the Queer Wellness Center and others to figure out where our assumptions are correct and where maybe we have been misguided.
Can I give
yes.
Just an example? So Fourth recently engaged in its first public Pride event, and we the team that we have created, it's called Allied Fourth, is our team that has been overseeing this work for a few years now, really wrestled with whether or not to show up in the space. We said, is this just performative? Are we trying to pat ourselves on the back for finally getting on board with what God's been calling the church to do for centuries? Like, is this a way of us to like virtue signal? And we had to check in and say, is that there? We also had to say, how does this affect our ongoing partnership and visibility in the community long term? And so for that particular event, we were invited by an LGBTQ plus person who was the owner at this restaurant who was offering this event. And we were also recognizing the other community partners who were going to be there as people we were already in community with, too. So it wasn't as though we were outsiders infiltrating this thing for the sake of looking good. It was, we have deep partnerships here, and we want to show up at the table alongside of these folks at their invitation, and it was an honor to be invited. Let me contrast that with maybe, I guess this would have been 2019, an organization, it was our local PFLAG chapter, had heard that Fourth was affirming. We had a gay minister on staff, and we were a part of the PCUSA, and all PCUSA churches are affirming, right? that was an assumption. And so they came to us and said, hey, can we put you on our website as a safe space, as a safe church for LGBTQ people in the upstate of South Carolina? And I had to say no, because we hadn't done the work. And it was important for me to be able to say, I don't think that a queer person would experience overt harm, at least not from maybe the pulpit, but congregationally, we had not done the work. We had not assumed any of the risk. We had not done the education. And so the most faithful thing that I could do at that invitation is say, no, you can't advertise that visibly for us. We haven't earned it, you know?
Yeah. The practical steps of how strategy can change. I'll give an example of what Southminster has been. Southminster has been a part of Boise Pride for 15 years. And the way we show up now is a lot different than the way we showed up 15 years ago as I look back at the pictures. 15 years ago, there were t-shirts that said, were you wounded by the church? Get a straight apology here. And it was a part of straight folks of the church wanting to be that first voice of, we recognize that we are a part of a wider body that has really done harm. And at that time, they had tablecloths, linens out on the table at the Pride booth where folks could write notes in Sharpie markers. Whether it's a note of joy, an act of defiance in the midst of a world that is trying to bring them down, a note of a prayer, a note of pain and suffering, the admission of, the church has hurt me. I was kicked out of home when I was 17, all those sorts of things. And it was amazing how quickly the stories could get deep. Because here you are meeting someone for the first time, and within 10 seconds you offer them, would you like some swag? Do you want some water for your dog? And they're telling you their life story. Now, fast forward 15 years, the way we show up is a lot different because at this past Boise Pride, 90% of the volunteers who took a shift in our booth were LGBTQIA+ people. And so gone are the shirts that say, get your straight apology here, because now authentic community for us shows visibility in every aspect. And so you see the trans non-binary youth, you see the out bisexual pastor, you see the elder and her wife. And that is what community looks like now. Those same linens, we tried to stop doing them one year because it gets expensive. And people were looking for them because they look forward to it. And so now what we have started to do, all of those linens that have been built up over the years, we use as paraments in the sanctuary for a Pride worship service. And one of the most meaningful things that I have ever done is to stand at the communion table surrounded by the words and witness of generations of queer people, recognizing that their words, their life stories are etched into the memories of the community. And that we, going back to what you said of like, we're not inviting you in to what we're doing, we are stepping into the place where you've already been. To be showing up to the table where their words, their names, their faces, their prayers already existed is a really moving thing. So you can see where the strategy changes. As the conversation, as the congregation changes, the strategy is different. And it is always authentic. It requires authenticity. The pen that has the church website on it and like, here, take this home with you, visit our website, that's not gonna get much traction. But looking someone in the eye and seeing them and getting to know their story, being a place where they can share the deepest and hardest truths, that's something they might remember, right? And that's something that can make a difference. For all of those practical steps, one of the things that I love that Forth has done is use a toolkit that's available online. And so the list that Jackie has of resources.
Let me go ahead and just pass
Yes.
this out so that you can have it in your hands.
There is, so how many pages is the full toolkit?
So I've got a copy, I printed one copy. It's 72 pages. This is a toolkit that was created, it's called Building an Inclusive Church. It was created by Reconciling Works, which is out of the Lutheran tradition. And it's a pretty comprehensive toolkit for congregations who are wanting to commit to this work with some skin in the game and with some tangible steps. We didn't follow this exactly, but we used this, and there's also an online training that you can do as a part of this, and we used it as a guide. There were some parts of it that maybe didn't exactly fit, but it was helpful enough that it gave us a direction. It gave us a way to get started, gave us a way to assess our congregation's progress and to determine our next steps. So I have one copy of this, which I'll just leave on the front pew that you can check it out after the workshop if you'd like. I did spell that out for you at the very top of this resource sheet, and then I've also got some videos, books, a glossary of terms, and some websites that we used. These were just helpful for our congregation. This is not comprehensive, but I'll go ahead and just pass that out so you can have it.
Great. The third topic is the work of publicity. And so we've talked about hospitality, we've talked about visibility, and now there's the work of publicity and how we show up in the world. I want to start with a note of a welcoming statement. Again, going back to the call search process where every single profile said, "We are a welcoming community." It can be helpful to be a little bit more clear of what welcoming is in our individual contexts. Brene Brown, the great social worker slash belonging slash hopefulness slash guru of all things health, says, "Clear is kind. Clear is kind." And that means if you are a congregation that only allows men to be pastors and elders, you should probably just put that on your website. It also means that we need to be clear about who it is that we are welcoming of and what welcoming looks like, whether it is come to be like us or let us be the beloved community together. Again, I have a couple places where my job is to give some shout outs. And so I'm going to put my Covenant Network board member hat on for just a moment. One of the ways that folks find helpful when they are within the network of Covenant Network congregations is the way we go about churches becoming a part of the network is to commit to the call to covenant community, which is a short half-page outline of what we commit to do in terms of educating, in terms of advocacy, in terms of belonging and inclusion within the church and in the world. So I can tell you what Southminster does as a longtime Covenant Network congregation. Our welcoming statement is the call to covenant community, and then it links to the Covenant Network of Presbyterians. It did not require, really, they could have done more work of sitting down and writing their own welcoming statement through a couple of years of education. What they did was say, no, we're committed to this work. We're a part of the Covenant Network, and we commit to this covenant community, and we're going to do what we can to live into that. As imperfectly and sinfully as we humans are, we're going to do our best to live into that. So it can be as simple and straightforward as that. I do think the work of the welcoming statement of figuring out who we are is important and matters.
Yeah, for us, it's a part of the toolkit. And for us, the process was long and rocky. We had a group working on what we called a belonging statement. And that group worked for about 8 months and brought it to our diaconate, who considered it for about 4 months, and then to the session, who considered it for 2 months. and concluded at a 7-7 vote that we didn't have enough time with it, and that we needed more time and more education. And so that was hard. That was really a hard season. And we said, okay, we have more work to do here. And we listened to the elders who said, we're not ready to vote on this, we need more time. So we also listened to the deacon who said, I wanted to get married in my church last year, but I didn't know if I could ask. I didn't know if I would be allowed. And so we felt both the pressure to act and the wisdom to integrate into the entire community the work that we've been doing. This doesn't need to be the work of just your leadership. It needs to be the work of the entire congregation. And we did more work and more education and more time and more listening. And I will tell you that the statement that we eventually passed was a better statement than the one we initially brought. And in fact, it was more inclusive than the one we initially brought. So what felt like a failure instead was a catalyst. And this statement approved 14-1. And so it was a process. And I'm not going to say we got it all the way right. But what this statement has provided for us is a benchmark. Okay, this statement will likely need to evolve over the next, decades, right? But it provides a benchmark by which we can measure all of our policies and practices, the things we do as a congregation. We now can say, are we living in alignment with our value statement? And let me just read, our value statement is long. We rewrote our entire value statement. We're talking about worship, education, spirituality, compassion and care, mission. We rewrote all of it. But the diverse and inclusive section says, we affirm and invite the full belonging of people of all races, ethnicities, cultures, ages, sexual orientations, gender identities, abilities, educational attainment, and socioeconomic statuses in this faith community, promoting the equitable participation of all in the life of this congregation, including worship, sacraments, membership, ordination, marriage, teaching, preaching, fellowship, committees, leadership, and employment. Clear as kind.
Clear as kind.
Clear as kind.
And that work, it almost becomes a communications inventory where we are looking not just at our worship language and liturgy, but at our value statement, at our committee vision statements, purpose statements, at the language in our bulletins and in the pew racks, our language on the website, our language in social media, even our mission partners. There might be some difficult conversations if we have partnered for 20 years with this agency down the road that is not inclusive of queer people. What does it look like to do mission with them? And that might change. So that communications inventory then becomes a theological inventory and a missional inventory of who are we and where do our practices and our worship and our theology align, and where are we no longer where we were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and how can we grow together in
right.
that?
And our welcoming statement is not a final destination. It is a launching place from which we have to continue the work of addressing all of our practices and policies and language and leadership now in light of this new statement that has been created. And it is opening up wisdom in all kinds of directions that we hadn't considered. And one other practical thing I'll say is that to help our congregation understand the importance of this, Maureen Coburn, who was supposed to be here today on the panel but couldn't be, she sat down with she presented a slideshow to our session that had the welcoming statements on the websites of about 10 different churches in our Greenville community. And so she projected them all up there without the names of the churches. And she said, if I am a queer person and I'm looking for a church in Greenville, how do I know where it's safe. And all of them said we're a welcoming congregation, and yet we know very deeply that that is not true. And so she helped our session see the problem, and until people see the problem, they can't begin to work alongside of you on the solution. So it was important for people to see, if I'm a queer person in Greenville, I actually can't rely on those statements alone. They're not clear, they don't actually tell me anything, you know?
The last place of publicity that we want to mention is the place of publicity in the public square. A great way to earn trust is to show up in places like Pride, to show up to places like PFLAG, and to be supportive of queer people and their families. A great way to lose trust is to walk away when things get tough, when lives are on the line legislatively and in the court system, in the libraries and schools. And it is all too easy to say, well, that's not our work to do. And yet, many of the folks who show up to school board meetings, who show up to their local library, to show up to the legislature, are doing so as people of faith. And they're using language of Christianity, albeit not the language that many of us are familiar with in this room. And so another important step of publicity, of being seen in the public world, is the willingness to show up when times get tough. A few things on that. One, when you show up to a library, so in Idaho, there's been book bans just like there are in many other states, and I'm sure South Carolina is included in that. One of our local library districts decided, rather than go through the process of banning books, let's just close the library. Right? And so their vote was a vote to close the library. Let's just stop. Reading is hard. And if you read things, you might learn something. So the vote was literally to close the library district. And there were church members who showed up and who were ready to speak words of difficult truth, despite the risk. The same is true in school boards. The same is true Boise, Idaho is a capital city, just like Columbia is. So, and there is an opportunity and also a responsibility to walk across the street and be a visitor to our friendly local neighborhood politicians. Also, the reconnaissance missions. So much miscommunication has happened in the world of drag shows, in the world of banned books, for example. And so one easy thing that church members can do as a part of their faith, reconnaissance mission, go to a drag show. You heard me say that. Go to a drag show. Get a banned book and read it front to back. And then when your neighbor or your politician says, well, that book has X, Y, Z in it, you can say, did you read it? Because I did. I didn't see that in there. Can you tell me what chapter? Newsflash, they don't know what chapter. The same is true of drag shows. So much has been said about drag artists reading to children. They've never met a drag performer. And so there is an opportunity there. Showing up for prayer vigils, showing up for silent witness, showing up for opportunities where you can use your voice of faith. And what I mean by that is we cannot cede our voice of Christianity and the Christian faith to those who speak the loudest. Now more than ever, our voice is needed. With that comes, again, the chance of risk. Jackie mentioned that their congregation does not look today the way it did 5 years ago. The congregation has morphed. People have come, others have left. I want to name the reality of the risk that it is not all roses. Our congregation has received its fair number of death threats in the past year. There have been days that we had to physically unplug our phone so that we would, because a hate group posted our phone number online. And we got 400 calls in a day before we decided to just unplug the phone. There has been vandalism. I want to name the reality of that. The truth is, the work of justice, and Jesus knew this all too well, did not always make him many friends, and that is an understatement. It is helpful, I think, for our folks at Southminster. One of the things that has been helpful is for the session in these conversations has been mindful of, if this is how hard it is for us as a church community, every now and again, when a hate group posts our information online, what must it be like to go through the world as a trans person every single day? What must it be like for them to leave their house and walk out into the world hoping that they'll be able to walk back into their home at night? That's a weird place to be coming to a close on. The risk and reward, that's a really, good luck everyone, now let's go in peace. No, the reality is there will be bumps in the road, and some of those bumps are internal as congregations morph and shift. And I'll be honest, some of the bumps in the road happen in our communities and the way that we are known by our neighbors. That road is not always easy. I believe it's faithful. But that goes back to the work of education. If the pastor knows, yeah, we could get some death threats. You might want to make sure the session is on board with that before you go any further. If the session is aware, we might have a protester show up on Sunday morning someday. It might be helpful to do some education where everyone in the congregation has a basic understanding of this is who we are and this is what we're about. Mm-hmm. The work is edifying and joyful and terrifying.
And life-saving.
And life-saving.
Mm-hmm. Adventurous.
Adventurous. Let's use more good words. It's faithful and just, and it leads to an authentic welcome, mm-hmm. a sense of belonging. We're on a journey right now, and we don't know where we're going, but my hope and prayer is that the church is a part of the movement, mm-hmm. That we can continue to be a place of welcome and belonging and respite and sanctuary for those who do not always have a place to call home. That we might be that place, not just because we have blessings and we get to be a blessing to others, but maybe that we might also be greatly blessed in the process. That we might grow in faith and in knowledge and in self-worth as we are seeing the people of God and the face of Christ on each person. That we might have something to learn and grow and be nourished by. Mm-hmm. That's my prayer.
That's my prayer too. And as we close, there's one thing I want to be sure to say, and I want to give credit where credit is due in our congregation. This work began not because the pastors felt strongly about this. This work took root in our congregation because we had LGBTQ youth in 2020 coming out and saying, I need to know where my church stands, or I need my parents, they're coming out of their parents, and their parents are coming to us to say, what do we do about this? What are our resources? They look to their church. We had 14 students over the course of 2 years come out and seek resources from their congregation.